Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this very, very exciting webinar that we have today. I'm just going to give it a minute or two just while various attendees join at the 10 o'clock mark. But while I do, I thought I'd use this opportunity to first introduce myself and do a little bit of housekeeping and a few updates and notes from the HMA. So for those of you that haven't met me, my name's Harry Fielder. I'm the community chair of the Hotel Marketing Association. If you have been into any of these webinars before, you'll know that these sort of sessions are hopefully as interactive as possible. We hugely encourage you to put questions into the Q&A. If anyone that I know, I can see a whole bunch of people in here. If anyone could just chuck a couple of questions into the Q&A, just so I know that it's working, that would be amazing. Because what we don't want to do is get to the end and everyone's tried to interact and they can't. So please do chuck. Oh yeah, perfect. It's all coming in. Katie, thank you very much. That's brilliant. So we do have Q&A working. That's great. And Malcolm, thank you. Brilliant. Okay, got loads of people here today. So some housekeeping from the HMA. The first thing that I want to mention is that we have recently launched our awards for this year. So the 2026 Hotel Marketing Awards are now live. We have 7 categories, and the entries are now open. So please do head over to the Hotel Marketing Association website. I'll put the link in the chat now. Hopefully everyone can see this. Oh, it comes from my picture of Jane. I've commandeered her account today. So please do head over to the awards page, which has all of the different categories, all of the entry information. It even has a really cool roundup video of our last year's awards at the Savoy. But there's also an interesting new category this year on the best implementation of AI in a marketing strategy, which is obviously new for this year, and we're really looking forward to seeing entries on that. The next exciting piece of housekeeping is that we're really looking forward to, and it's only a couple of weeks away on the 12th of February, but we have our annual lecture. We're reinstating the HMA annual lecture, and we are very, very lucky to have Neil Stone, who is going to be giving us a talk on how end-to-end product design can drastically improve the commercial performance of a property. So if you don't know Neil, do look him up. He was one of the leading minds behind the flatbed that was introduced to BA, which really turned a corner a lot for sort of luxury flights. He's done all sorts of interesting sort of creative design approaches to innovation, and really tying that creativity to commercial performance. So I've spoken to him a lot before, and the anecdotes that he has are amazing, the stories that he has to tell. So please do head over. I'm going to put that link in the chat as well. So please do head over to the HMA, or that's, I think, on the hospital website, and sign up there, because that promises to be a very, very interesting event. I can assure you. I've spent many an hour chatting with Neil, and he's wonderful. Right, now onto the main piece. If I've forgotten anything on the housekeeping, someone who knows what I've forgotten, just message me and I'll round it up at the end. But I'm incredibly excited to introduce 2 of our panelists today, and we're tackling the topic of sort of 5 core missed opportunities, really, in maximizing total revenue. We often get quite caught up in the accommodation side of things, but today we really want to draw from real world examples and focus on total revenue. And to help us do this, I'm joined by 2 wonderful people. So we're joined by Valerie Cook, who's the Revenue Strategy Director at Rudding Park, and we're joined by Matthew Prosser, who is the Senior Sales Director at Agilysys. So I'd like to just hand over briefly to them to introduce themselves a little bit more, a bit about their roles, a bit about their business, and then we'll crack into the 5 core themes of this session. So Valerie, if I might start with you.
Hello. So I work at Rudding Park, just outside Harrogate. So we're a 90-bedroom hotel. We have spa, restaurants, 3 restaurants, golf, meeting and event space, as well as self-catering and holiday park. A big part of what I do is oversee the strategy, forecasting budgets for every area of the business, as well as systems as well. So I kind of cover a bit of everything and try and get my head into all of it. And we also try and track everything day by day, which really helps us when we're looking at maximising overall revenue.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Matthew.
Yes, thank you, Harry. Thanks for the invitation. Much appreciated. Yes, myself, I've spent just over 30 years in this industry. It's a long time. And I started off as a hotelier, perhaps like many people listening on this call. I was an ex-operator, predominantly more food and beverage before I headed into the room side. And then, yes, after a number of years working within the hotel industry, I moved into the supply chain. So for a good 20 odd years, I've been involved in the technical software side of the industry. And today, my responsibilities within Agilysys are essentially heading up the commercial team. So we have a team of about 10 individuals across the UK, Ireland, and European region. And right now, it's exciting times, I have to say. I've been associated with Agilysys since about 2010, 2011, and we're doing some really, really exciting things. And hopefully this is a great forum to allude to some of those as we progress through the next hour. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Thank you. Fantastic. So let's get into the first core theme. And these have all been derived from conversations that we've had over the last few weeks to really unpack where we think is the most important things to focus on. And the first core theme that we want to focus on is not challenging guest booking behaviors enough, and how those have actually evolved over time. So one missed opportunity is that we have our own preconceived ideas of how guests behave. But I'd really like to first, if I might go to you, Matthew, how do you think those guest behaviors have actually changed in material ways over the last few years?
Sure. I mean, we've had COVID obviously in between, haven't we? Certainly if we think about the last decade. Look, I think for me, first of all, that generational shift continues, right, between that traditional aspect and that digital aspect. We have a much smarter, much more elevated, digitally savvy guest that definitely expects more. Perhaps willing to spend a little bit more with us as well, but they want more in return. And I think in addition to that booking window is condensing, right? Leaving, hoteliers probably sweating a little in terms of, how they're driving the occupancy, and people aren't booking as far out. They're leaving it perhaps more to the last minute, so to speak. So I think that's key. But definitely the guest is becoming a lot wiser and a lot sharper to how the OTAs operate. Of course, in the consumer world, they might not reference them as OTAs, but they are, I think, making comparisons between how the OTA operates versus how the hotels apply much more effort in attracting direct bookings. And what that means, I think, for the guest, for the consumer, is really a choice between speed. I think OTAs deliver some good speed in terms of that booking workflow. But that's versus maybe the guest desire for that ever rising expectation around personalization and that expectation at the hotel level. And on one hand, you've got the fast OTA booking experience, but in turn, the guest, discovers that there's a lack of a personal touch upon check-in and then throughout their experience in the hotel. Such things as hotel attributes, even down to the room number that people want to choose now compared to maybe 10 years ago, it is becoming more prominent. People specifically want to know every attribute about their stay, even if that's going to cost them a bit more money. They're keen on how they, I guess, progress down that attribute ability to book their room and other key elements of their stay. And I think, in summary, we can't also avoid that online reviews are key. All right. They've been ever present, right? And used strongly since they've gained acceptance, but they're really generally important. Certainly if I think about my consumer world and my family and friends, how important is that guests commit to a location for the first time. They can be easily put off with one or two reviews, and they'll move on quickly to a hotel that maybe they're not familiar with, and they'll move on to another. So I think, that social media interaction is extremely key as we move forward again in the coming months and years. But yes, so I think there's a mix that we've got, different demographics. We've got the traditional guest, we've got the digital savvy guest, and then we've got how they interpret the booking experiences between OTAs versus direct bookings, the benefits of direct bookings, and then the overall decision-making process that they're relying on when it comes to social media as well. So yeah, just some thoughts that come to mind.
Yeah. Fantastic. I think that leaving it to the last minute, the actual the limitations of personalization that the OTAs can actually offer from a booking perspective is a really interesting one. Val, it'd be great to hear from you in terms of how you've materially seen that shift. I know you definitely had thoughts around how things were pre-COVID, how things are now. It'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
So I think there has been a sharp change in how people go around booking a hotel. Matthew's touched on a couple, particularly around lead times. And immediacy is one that we're really seeing coming through. And that's both with, once I've made the decision, I don't want to then spend hours or 4 visits checking my details or checking that I've made the right decision. I want to book it now. I think that's where, particularly if we're looking at direct bookings via a booking engine versus the OTAs, hotels are still struggling to keep up with the OTAs in the sense of there's less friction on their websites. You can see the clear attributes of a bedroom. You can see exactly what's available. I'm sure a lot of people will use sites as kind of Google searches, but then it's how you get them to transfer to the hotel direct. A lot of our booking engines are still conversational, so it's a bit of a slog to get through it. And then the alternative is to contact the hotel direct, and there is a challenge with phone calls being unanswered, emails taking longer to respond to. And I think that's where the guest behaviour change has come in, whereas someone might have been happy to leave a message and get a call back within an hour, or send an email with an inquiry and wait up to the end of the day to get a response. That need for immediacy and to make that decision and know it's booked has become that if you aren't responding, if you aren't answering the phone or you're not responding to that inquiry within an hour, that is almost seen as a wall that's being put up. And then you're not actually seeing that lost revenue. It's almost invisible because you're not making that guest intent visible at that point. So I think, and they've moved on to the next option, which can often be booking your venue through an OTA or an alternative altogether. And I think that really does tie into the lead times that Matthew mentioned. Yeah. Because it's really difficult to make decisions when everything's coming in really late, and making sure that almost you're holding your nerve so you're not losing, whether it's that room revenue, whether it's that table in the restaurant, or that spa treatment, that you are actually confident and you're holding. But then if it doesn't come in, you've got no time to pivot and do something different with it.
Yeah. Sorry,
Matthew.
Yeah, I was just going to say that transcends, doesn't it, into operational challenges, you know, in terms of labor, how you staffing, what the metrics associated with, you know, the restaurant, the spa, you know, other activity areas, you know, how are you, you know, jostling and balancing in terms of predicting what's going to happen when it's, you know, it is left, you know, much later. It just becomes much harder, I think, for hotels to determine, which in turn affects maybe you know, the individuals that are working within the hotel. Are they working? Aren't they working?
And I think that's raises an interesting point for certainly destination hotels that are very multifaceted, where, you know, the accommodation room booking journey might be very seamless. However, that's if you're trying to have a sort of residential spa package, for example, which does touch so many different parts of the business, you know, we can programmatically and seamlessly book one part, but, you know, the ability to then fulfill the other elements, tables, spa, etc., in a kind of manual capacity, you're almost stuck because you've got half immediate fulfillment and delivering that immediacy, but then not the other half.
And I think that's quite key because people want to know at the time of booking exactly what they're doing and what they're getting, so that
the whole stay.
Yeah, and yes, likely they will want to change it as it comes nearer to their stay or even on the day that they check in. But ultimately, at that time of booking, they want to know they've got their table at 8 o'clock or their treatments at 2:30, and exactly what they're doing. And I think it was really interesting to touch on operationally when we're talking about missed opportunities for revenue, because yes, that short lead Sunday lunches, for example, you know, a lot of your bookings come in within 48 hours. But then if you haven't got the staff to staff those tables, you have to close out. So again, as Matthew said, I think it ties in across the board, not just from a strategy point of view in the traditional sense, but also actually opening up to the operational teams, because that change in behaviour makes it very tough to do your rotas, to manage your payroll, which obviously is quite a key point within hospitality at the moment.
Very much so. Very much so. Fantastic. In terms of some of the bottlenecks or the typical bottlenecks that you see around that booking flow, just in terms of addressing these guest perceptions before we move on to the next one. where do you feel some of the key bottlenecks in the booking journey are at this stage?
I think I do think websites, booking engines are
Hmm.
a part of that. Again, particularly from a resort model like ourselves, if you don't have that flow, the way people now behave when they're booking online is very commercial. It's very much like retail. You almost putting into a shopping basket rather than doing a traditional flow with lots of words and lots of guidance. They just want to be able to pick and choose what they're doing. I think if they aren't able to do that online, I think key bottleneck is phones not being answered or emails being responded to. January to March is always a tough time in a sales office because it's almost your busiest, because it's where your year's ramping back up. So you do get delays. And as soon as you get that kind of bottleneck kick in, an example would be phones. People don't leave messages anymore. They just keep calling and keep calling. And that's then creating more of a bottleneck because more people can't get through. And that's definitely something that we see, that we're able to report on, is actually see the volume of people that are just putting the phone down and redialing. And you almost sort of say it's not helping.
No, I don't.
It's good that people are calling you, though, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
when you think about, again, the world we live in, where everyone just likes to hide behind their email and engage with email, at least that interaction. I mean, I'm a traditionalist, so speaking to people is better than emailing. So it's good to hear at least you're having the telephone interaction as well.
Yeah, interesting. We have two very clear routes to booking direct, and we still have quite a large proportion that enjoy speaking to our teams. But I think that also leans into the resort because there are so many things that you can do and so many things to add on, and therefore questions. We intentionally don't have a chatbot on our booking and on our website. Because we found that created dissatisfaction and bottlenecks because it couldn't answer the range of questions that were being asked. So we do want to lean into that because, again, it comes into the personalisation and building those relationships.
Absolutely. Brilliant. So then sort of getting onto that as our next kind of key theme, which is that personalization piece. So I think when I initially sort of came into these conversations thinking about personalization, I was coming at it from a very much a sort of a marketing space. But what's been really interesting to learn from you both has been actually it's probably more about sort of team empowerment than it is perhaps a guest communication piece. So perhaps Matthew, it'd be really interesting to understand just to tell us a little bit about the golden profile, what a golden profile is, how are we centralizing that data, and then I suppose we'll move on to Val just to understand. Okay, well, what does that actually mean for the team on the team actually on site? So perhaps Matthew, just tell us a little bit about how what is that golden profile? What is that? What is sort of data aggregation, unification, etc.?
Well, the golden profile is, something that's perhaps been talked about in our industry for years and years and years, right? And almost a holy grail, isn't it? If someone could give me this golden profile, and for me as an ex-hotelier, I'd love to have had that type of information at my fingertips. And I think we have to go back 20, 30 years actually in terms of truly understanding why that golden profile is challenging to provide. We in this industry have had this mindset, this concept of procurement that spans so many years in how we go about creating our technology stack for our hotels. That's very, very different from other industries. All right, whether that be retail, leisure, but our industry, we've heard it many times, has always, in inverted commas, lagged behind other industries. All right, but that shouldn't be the case, right? We should be the ones leading. We should be the ones innovating. There's lots of fantastic people in our industry to deliver some fantastic solutions. But if you procure a fragmented technology stack, the ability for you to do two things becomes harder. One is obviously to pull that data together. And if it actually wasn't for that fragmented procurement mindset, CRM systems wouldn't have materialized, because CRM systems materialized because we had all these products sitting in different areas with different data silos. And at some point, someone thought, well, hang on a second, We need to actually put all that into one place, and we need to crunch it, and we need to, recruit some fantastic marketeers that then, by way of extracting this data, can create some fantastic campaigns. And they do, right? And once that guest left the hotel, we create the campaigns, we tailor it, we filter it, and we are specific to their needs, and hopefully we get a return on that. But that's a missed trick, all right? Because actually, should we continue down that path and base our procurement intentions on what we've learned the last 20 or 30 years? Or should we look forward in terms of what other industries are doing outside of ours, and I guess take heed from the benefits and successes that they've had in how they can manipulate data? And I guess where I'm heading is that, you've got a choice of multiple systems. All right. Not holding data collectively in a real-time environment. Or you've got the opportunity, actually, in terms of what we have been successful in providing over the last number of years, is a system. All right. A system that just holds data in the middle. So not only have you lost the ability to think about how we get this data above it into another product to crunch, but actually we've now got an opportunity to make decisions in the moment. All right. So it's not about 2-3 weeks down the line. For me,
can you give me an example of that?
An example of.
So, for example, let's say your data is in real time coming together. What would a sort of perhaps a commercial decision
absolutely.
be in the
let's look at two examples then. Let's look at a very simple nuance. You've gone with your family, you've gone into the spa and had a lovely time, couple of treatments. You've then gone to the restaurant in the evening, all right? And the restaurant manager at the host stand says, "Evening, Mr. Fielder. Welcome to the restaurant. How was your experience in the spa?" Wow. Oh, that's nice. Now that's slightly meaningful. It creates an icebreaker. It creates an opportunity to engage, and obviously further conversation will then transcend as you go to the restaurant. But actually, that's a true example of a system working in unison together, all right, to ensure that data flow exists wherever and whatever touch point or whatever department you're in within the hotel. All right. It might be allergen information. I mean, allergen is so important right now. All right. That actually, why should allergen just be held in a restaurant reservation system when actually it should be held just in the system? All right. And again, if you think about complexities around different systems and how we provide that allergen information or nutrient information, that's pretty key. The flip side of that, the operational side of that, is actually leveraging that data again live and in the moment. Remember, when that guest typically checks into a resort, leaves that front desk, how do we communicate with them? Yes, of course, we're probably going to see them at a dinner, and we're going to upsell from the rump steak to the fillet steak, whatever it is. But actually, how about being a bit more slick in terms of how we understand the transient nature and trends of that guest? And actually, if they're staying with us for 3 to 4 days, surely we can squeeze a little bit more out of their wallet during their stay. Because again, when they've gone, it's down to the marketeers to entice them back. And I can guarantee you they're not coming back next week, next month, or 6 months. They may be looking somewhere else. So when they're with us in the moment, that's our opportunity to drive more revenue. So actually, through analyzing the data in the moment, all right, we can target those individuals through push notifications, messaging, and tailor specific messages to specific individuals. Let's say we know that this individual likes spa or likes golf or likes dining. We can target specific individuals with offers. Maybe the restaurant's not full tonight, so we can put something to them. But we as a hotel have the opportunity to direct targeted messages in the moment to particular guests in certain categories to drive revenue. And at any point, any operator, and this is actually very key, any operator within a customer of ours has the ability to see the same intelligent guest profile information, whether I'm in the spa, I'm in the dining hall, I'm in the front desk, wherever it is. So the days of just being welcome back at the front desk, thank you for your loyalty, and I'll see you in 2 days' time, or not at all, because we have a checkout process, it is really key. So a couple of real world examples that play out today.
Really interesting. We have one of our conversations a little bit later with the kind of that integration doesn't necessarily mean unification, which is an interesting point. But Val, you mentioned some really interesting practices that you have in terms of the listening out for just things that people say and making sure that the guest profile itself is an empowerment tool for the front of house to do their jobs really, really well. So it'd be great to hear about those sorts of practices that you've implemented, and how that profile can ultimately improve revenue and also the experience side of things.
Yeah, so for us, it's about encouraging the teams to have those conversations with guests. Yes, there are points, whether it's our reservations team, whether it's our front desk, or a member of our bar team or in the restaurants, there's points they have to hit, but ultimately it's not about scripts. It's not about it sounding robotic or automatic. And I think the idea is that in those moments, it's informal. It's very open question led. We ultimately want to know about the guest. And I think what that enables our team members to do is react in that moment. So it can come down to something like an offhand comment from a guest about they're upset because their favourite football team lost, that then develops into a conversation that, if that is noted briefly on their profile and that profile translates into our restaurant, in real time, a member of our restaurant team can refer to that, or they might be a huge, for example, Arsenal fan themselves and be able to engage in those conversations. And that immediately we find builds trust as well. So and it teaches the teams to be able to read the room, live in the moment within those conversations, and bring their own personalities into it, because they are free to do that and they are empowered to do that, whether that's from recommending a certain type of wine based on what the guest had previously, or feeling confident in recommending a certain type of treatment because we have that information. It isn't about eavesdropping on our guests. It's about picking up on those little tidbits that actually really help us enhance their stay and experience. And I think then the upsell, if you like, stops feeling like an interruption or a hard sell. It actually feels really natural in that moment. And I do think, and timely and helpful as well. I think that's the key thing, is tying into listening to our guests and understanding what's going to help them. Something we try and teach the sales team is solve the problem. Don't just sell to the guest. Find out what their challenge is, why they're getting away, and solve that problem. And I think that ties in outside of rooms as well and really helps push that. And having all of that information on a profile really enables that to spread through the resort. Whether, you could be here for a wedding, and normally meeting and events don't tend to cross over with rooms or spa or restaurants. But again, having those little tidbits really helps that guest flow, but also that guest experience, which only encourages increasing your revenue.
So much. And I really like the just that approach of looking at personalization and this sort of central profile as an enabler of empowering the team to have those better conversations, which naturally will lead into more revenue and also a better experience. Now I think going into it, a lot of also the people joining the call, personalization for them, they will immediately look at it through the lens of perhaps guest communication and segmentation. So I think this has been a really interesting angle to sort of take on it.
Yeah, I think you have to be careful that you don't assume every guest wants the same thing, or whether it's the booking process, whether it's how they want to arrive at the hotel and what they want to do while they're with us. And I think, again, we've been in this trap before, where you're very structured because you assume that every guest, or right, you're corporate, you're leisure, so you must want X, Y, and Z. And that's far from the point. And I think particularly, you can look at corporate as just plain corporate, but actually they have friends, they have family, they have partners, and they do things outside of their business world. So again, it's laying the foundations as well, I think, which again, having that information really does help. But I think it's tying into that in that moment. So again, the teams are empowered. If they overhear that someone's celebrating something that maybe our reservations and front desk teams didn't pick up, they can absolutely appear at their table with a glass of Prosecco for them or a glass of champagne in that moment to just continue to enhance that. And then that will get noted and then referenced throughout their stay in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. And I think that pivots really nicely onto our next thing, which starts to touch on digital transformation or technology transformation. But a lot of what we're certainly with my experience, and I don't know, Matthew's experience kind of in the technology space, you raised a really interesting point the other day around actually executing on this is far more of a cultural challenge than it is what equally as a cultural challenge as to a technology challenge. So actually, I'll come to you in a moment, Matthew. I think certainly just as a continuation, empowering those people to have those conversations and the cultural work required. It might be just really interesting to hear about how you, I guess, approach that with the team. I know it was a comment you made in terms of we teach people to do this, but understanding what cultural requirement or cultural changes there are to actually make the very best of that approach.
Yeah, I think ultimately almost everything comes down to the culture that you're in. I think particularly within hospitality, we train very much on KPIs and targets and specifics, and actually that isn't necessarily how the flow works when you're actually on the floor. But also, and I think we have to recognise that hospitality has a young team coming through. I don't think any of us are not aware of the challenges of building the idea of a career into the current job marketplace. A large proportion, we actually, funny enough, had our staff party last night, and it really highlights just how a large proportion of our staff are in their late teens, 20s. And that's a very different approach to perhaps how I might approach a guest, or the skill set that I grew up with, whether that's making eye contact, engaging with your guests, knowing how to read a room is key. The last thing you want to do is walk up to a table and try and force a conversation that the guests aren't wanting or willing to have. And that comes into the world of training, but also that culture of it's okay to fail as well. It's okay to learn as you go, as long as that support is there. Because not everyone's a natural at being able to have those conversations, of being able to upsell. So I think it's creating a safe space. I think it's practical training on the floor as well as theoretical. But I think it's about shared incentives. I think it's really important not to silo teams and actually have that cross-functional approach. And that whether that comes in with shared incentives of meeting targets, but also actually, because then there's conversations. It happens whether it's in our green room, our canteen, whether it's when they're out and about, because a lot of our teams socialise outside of work. And it just kind of brings that idea of a culture and in it together approach. And I think that ties in with any change that you want to make as well. You need to get the teams behind you. They need to understand why and how it matters, not just that I'm being told to do this. You need their buy-in. Because ultimately it's just going to feel like it's not a conversation, it's a wall. And they can bring so much to that conversation because they're the ones speaking to guests, engaging on the floor.
Very much.
Do you find there's a split, Valerie? Sorry, Harry.
No.
Just a question. Yeah. Do you find there's a split sometimes in meetings where you might have, the more traditional individual versus, the younger demographic that's coming in and providing ideas, and there's a bit of a cross discussion basically, and not that I'm saying heated by any way, but they're bringing their new fresh digital ideas, and you've got more traditional
definitely.
and how you find some middle ground on that.
I think the most dangerous thing in any industry is, well, we've always done it that way, or that's not going to work because I've been doing it this way for so long. I think you have to put your ego and that side and actually look at things for what it is. But also you can get some amazing ideas from team members on the floor. And actually, if you just actually step back and look at it and actually maybe tweak it, maybe change it, I think it's great to actually give that team member, okay, it's, work on it, take it away, do a bit more work, and then come back to us. But yeah, I think there's comfort in the traditional ways of doing things. We've had quite a lot of conversations recently where we're wanting to change some processes. And a lot of these sectors people find difficult, but there's comfort in doing it how you've always done it. And I think you're always going to and that's where you need to create those safe spaces. It's probably an overused term for something that's actually really important. People need to feel that it's okay to say things that aren't going to work out, or just throw those crazy ideas out there. Brainstorming is quite key for us in commercial. People throw out crazy ideas, but actually it's crazy at the beginning. But once more voices have got involved in that idea, actually it becomes something that is actually you can sell, is really important, and can actually work really well, whether that's an operational process or actually an experience for our guests.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just on the from a digital transformation project, getting that buy-in, drawing the value from all of those different brains that have wonderful sort of nuanced understanding of how things work and everything. From looking at sort of large whole scale change in an organization, Matthew, what do you see some of the traits of I know culture probably being one of them, but for those that have really successfully adopted quite a wide scale digital transformation project, perhaps replatforming, putting an entire new architecture in place, what are the traits of the businesses that you feel have done that most successfully, and why have they been successful at that?
Yeah, and again, I'm probably just going to, I guess, pick up on some comments that Val made in terms of ensuring that everyone's bought into it. Everyone has an opportunity to invest their own knowledge and ideas, and probably mixing it with a couple of things that I said earlier. Actually, that there's two camps, right? You can either stick or twist, really. I think in this modern era, do I keep leveraging that same procurement principle as I said earlier? That's been ever present for decades. All right. And what I mean by that is that fragmented approach to application purchase, and that comes with challenges with multiple interfaces, multiple development, multiple user interfaces in terms of the consistency that you have, training challenges that come with it, let alone multiple companies to deal with, or do actually, I do ensure my property is protected for the coming decades, and I commit as a team to move forward and protect my business in this digital era, the AI era. We're not going to touch too much on AI today. I think that's been sweated for other webinars. But I want to ensure that my property can move forward at pace commercially, and if it's got to move forward at a pace and an ever increasing pace, then I've got to do something with my technology stack. If I stay where I am because that's what I've known for 20-30 years and I feel comfortable in doing that, then the acceptance is you just have to appreciate that you will just plod along in the commercial world at a much slower pace than your competitors. So for me, it continues along that mindset shift, that there are alternatives, really good alternatives, and we see them in all walks of our consumer lives. And I think it's time that this industry did just that and moved along at an appropriate pace as well. But yeah, look, if you're changing technology, ultimately it is a change. It's a system upgrade. It's a transition. But the commercial survival of the property is what's key to future-proof and expanding those revenue streams. If you stay where you are, you're not going to be successful in 5-10 years' time. You are absolutely not going to be successful. So you have to consider the changes that are necessary for you to protect your property, protect the commercial success, and move forward and be beyond your competition all the time. Or
sort of two simultaneous ways of selling that into a team or addressing that with a team. One, existential crisis. Two, there are lots of upsides. Simultaneous threat and benefits.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. Brilliant. And so just looking at kind of our next kind of missed opportunity, perhaps, which we have touched on a little bit, but I want to go into it a little bit of detail, which was that integration. Just because our systems integrate and we are aggregating all of this data together, that doesn't necessarily mean that the data is unified and sort of actionable, I suppose. So I guess that I mean, there's an ongoing debate, and I'd say it's coming more and more to the forefront, really, of that. Do we go with a platform, or do we go with kind of best in class individual items? And I think the crux of it really lies in this. Well, one of the key battlegrounds is on that data unification piece. So I think that very act of sort of consolidating and merging profiles across these data silos, it becomes a very deliberate and a very intentional act, which is perhaps often overlooked when someone is going for that best in class. I'm going to pick up this system. Yes, they might all feed into the same place, but without that additional step of unification, we actually miss out on some of those benefits of that platform piece. And Val, I might just sort of come to you really, and just to understand a little bit about how you kind of, in terms of things like data silos and data that are sort of sitting in different pots, how are you kind of feeling that's going for you guys at the moment, and where do you feel the key silos are in your business that you're looking to overcome?
Yeah, I think probably even going back to the basics of data and ensuring that
Mm,
it's clean data for a start
mm,
is a big step. And I think when you're dealing with integrations and you don't have the main challenge with collecting that data is you are going to have duplication.
mm,
You potentially are going to have information in one system and not in the other, and it's even if it's flowing in the sense of, from my
mm,
point of view, I can pull reports. Our marketing team through the CRM can pull that data out. Actually, for our guests and for our teams on the floor, there's no that information is almost not useful to them because it doesn't
mhm,
mean anything. They can't use it in that moment, and I think ultimately that's where those silos develop as well, is in those
mm,
handover points. And that's where you get that duplication. I mean, you can get a pre-check-in email where you're asked to fill in all your details, but the reservation team member took your address and phone number when they made your booking. You're being asked to check it on a pre-check-in email, and then
mm.
on check-in you get asked to check it again.
Yeah.
Now, actually, that's an example where the system is one profile ultimately. So actually, if you then take that example, which happens on a regular basis in hotels, and actually expand that to where you don't have systems talking to each other, or you've got one set of data for your restaurant, one set for your hotel and spa, and then another for your meeting and events and your sales and catering system. There's no kind of accountability for it or ownership of it either, which I think is also immediately where you start to get those silos. And that then translates to the team and the experience that they're giving, because they can often feel like they're on the back foot because they don't have all the information. The guest gets frustrated. They're not feel that they're being listened to properly,
Mm,
which then compounds and adds to that feeling of, and then hits your revenue, sorry, with your loyalty, your upsells,
yeah.
because you're not creating a frictionless journey for
Mm,
people.
mhm,
And that applies to the teams as well. And it comes down to poor setup,
yeah.
ultimately. We have, in order to try and maintain that communication at the moment, we have a Word document, we have this report, that report that goes out every morning. But again, you're relying on teams who are busy to read all of that information when they should be able to just pick up a tablet and have it in front of them.
Yeah. 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 Really interesting. I think as well, if I might come to you, Matthew, on a lot of what Val's talking about there is quite sort of nuanced data. It's not just true, false, yes, no, uh, this segment, that segment. It's sort of softer information, really. It's kind of notes. It's possibly even images. It's things like that. How do we feel that the way, well, certainly I feel the way CRM has kind of structured itself in a very rigid tables and rows type methodology of, we have to predefine all of our understanding about what information we want to capture about someone, doesn't necessarily, just purely from an architectural and structural perspective, doesn't really cater for that softer collection of nuanced information about people. It'd be really interesting to just hear from the technology side how you see that potentially playing out in the world of this guest profile and
Sure.
CRM generally, really.
Sure. I mean, what's interesting that comes to mind straight away again is the way in which we talk, the way in which
Mm,
we as industry professionals talk about the data, the language and descriptive words we talk through regarding silos. This data's here, this data's over here. We're pulling this data together. I live in a world where that terminology doesn't exist. All right, the
mm,
data just exists. It just exists, like it does maybe in as I said, an application that you use in your consumer life. So whether again as the mentality, the mindset I've touched on before, the terminology, it is just a shift towards the future, that's playing out now in terms of how we manage information. Why can't the data for your property just be there? All right.
mhm, mhm,
Not in different systems. It's just there. And if it's just there, accessible in the moment, or post stay for whatever marketing purpose, surely that's a significant advantage. Going back again to my earlier point about fragmented systems, if you think of a hotel, they've got 15 different systems to run their business. That means
mhm,
15 different applications, 15 different code bases, 15 different UIs, 15 different trainees, 15 different companies to manage.
mhm.
I mean, it's just a myriad of activity that consumes either financial individuals or IT individuals. But surely if that data just existed there, that the benefit that brings is
Yeah, yeah.
enormous. So all of that language, just disappears. And
Mm,
The debate over best of breed versus one platform's been around for a long, long time, right? I don't know whether we've ever found a medium, but if you invest appropriately, all right, and those features and functions balance with, the I guess let's assume for the moment the mainstay products that perhaps playing out in the industry at the minute. If those features and functions exist, surely for the hotel, it's a benefit just to have a system and to have that data accessible at your fingertips in the moment all the time. And if you think about, this is the only time I'm going to mention AI, if you think about how AI can leverage that foundational data for now and into the future in terms of, proactively driving efficiencies and proactively driving better personalization and better experiences for guests, surely that's better doing it once than 15 times. All right.
I agree with you
Then
in
bring it
that,
together.
yeah, that ultimately too, AI has to latch onto something, and it's a lot easier to latch onto one rich source as opposed to a very fragmented source. So I fully agree there. Brilliant. The final point that we want to touch on before we go into hopefully a few Q&As. We've had a QA questions come in, but please do check them in into that QA if anything pops into your mind. Is the dynamic pricing side of things, and so I think the path is very well trodden from an accommodation perspective. But Vala, perhaps turn to you certainly as a revenue specialist. How do you feel that maximizing total revenue and that dynamic pricing piece feeds throughout the rest of the business? And it'd be great to hear a little bit about your experience across implementing that in other parts of the business.
For us, the ideal is to have the flexibility of dynamic pricing across every area of the business. Obviously, very traditional and well accepted within bedrooms. Definitely moving more into spa now. 7 years ago 8 years ago when we opened our large spa, it was almost unheard to do the level of dynamic pricing that you apply to rooms within the spa industry. And we are now moving into doing the same with our meeting and events, golf. Obviously, I think one of the areas tends to get avoided is restaurants, which is always an interesting and tough one. I think I go back and forth on dynamic pricing in restaurants quite a bit myself because of the product itself. But ultimately, it enables you to provide that flexibility to fill empty space that would otherwise go unfulfilled. It enables you to open yourself up to guests who may not normally look at you, or because of that perceived value or that perceived experience. And actually, what we find is it enables us to tailor make those experiences in any area of the business. Spas, a more obvious one in the sense of midweek, it's quieter. So actually people who are looking for more of that relaxed experience, because we are a social spa, means that actually they can actually get a really good price on a midweek date, but actually be trusted that it's going to be slightly quieter. So there's lots of nuances involved, and it isn't just about maximizing the pricing and the revenue. I think it tends to lag where ownership sits in between departments. So it's probably talking a little bit about restaurants and also beverage with M&E, within M&E. I think if something doesn't clearly belong to one area, it's harder to strategize or to apply dynamic pricing to it. And you tend to then go to your default fixed pricing and your manual handing. Again, tying it in with restaurants, are we as good as we should be at enhancing our menu prices relating to costs as well? And I think there's an element of dynamic pricing that can be applied there, because we know at certain times of the year that our cost pricing is going to change. So actually, should we be flexing our our pricing in the same way that we do with rooms with seasonality or weekends versus midweeks? So I think it enables you to really kind of get rid of that concept of it's a Sunday night, we're going to be quiet, or actually it's okay for 4 of my treatment rooms to be empty, because it enables you to go to a different route to market and actually utilize that space and maximize that revenue. And it can be done across areas. It's just your approach in it and how you do it, but how you message it. So for our meeting,
and how do you find that being sort of aligning with, I guess, with luxury, but also what's going to be culturally acceptable? I guess in the minds of the guests, because yes, asking it is an ask of the guest psychology to really get there.
I think the one that's freshest in my mind is the spa when we started
Mm,
doing it when our larger spa opened. We It was quite a shock to quite a few people that we spoke with that we were going to give it a go.
yeah.
Essentially, we were told on many occasions it wasn't going to work, and yes, we did initially, particularly. We did get pushback from some of our guests on, I want a set price. It's Tuesday. Why are you quoting me more? The people weren't used to seeing from prices when it related
Mm,
to a spa day or a spa experience. But actually, we found that because we taught our teams and guided them in what language to use and how to let our guests know what we were doing, we actually found it was accepted fairly quickly, and we probably didn't get as much pushback as we thought we would. What it enabled us to do was also guide people to those need dates and
mm,
actually fill that space. And particularly coming out of, or actually, sorry, just before COVID, that was definitely something that could be done. People were willing to make changes to their diaries and their lives in order to potentially go to those areas where they could see a reduced pricing. Um,
mm, mm,
I think with anything that you're going to change, there's always going to be friction. There's always going to be a defiance almost is why are you doing this? No one else does this. I think as an industry, we do need to be careful that we don't get stuck where we are, that we're always moving forward. And I think that really it applies to the product, but also in the commercial sense. We need to be reactive to the marketplace that we're in. And while obviously meeting our requirements to drive revenue, because ultimately that is what we are here to do. And we shouldn't apologize for that. Even though even in the luxury market, where also our main priority is to be here for our guest. And I think you have to try things. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. As I said, I think the restaurants is probably that kind of, do you charge more for a steak on a Saturday night than you would do on a Tuesday night? I think it ties in with set menus or reduced menu offering, but perhaps it's a push too far to actually look at the individual product. But no, I think if you approach it in the right way, your language, your messaging, and you're guiding and supporting your teams, I think that where you hit your problems is if your teams don't know what to say to people and there isn't a consistent message in what you're communicating. And again, from a meeting and events point of view, we didn't actually find it. We don't have as many layers as we might do for rooms or spa. But actually, again, being in that corporate marketplace, we haven't hit any challenges at all in the sense of people wanting to see a set price on the website. But again, I think for us, that ties in with the whole experience with online booking, but also having someone at the end of the phone that can support.
amazing. Really insightful. Thank you. And yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, don't be afraid to fail because ultimately these
Yeah.
are decisions that are going to be unique to individual properties and individual markets where you are. So amazing. Anything you'd like to add on that, Matthew, in terms of the
Well,
sort of dynamic pricing and a platform kind of informing those revenue decisions?
yeah, definitely. But I'm just going to come back to your points actually about the restaurant being an ex-restaurateur and
Yeah,
operator.
yeah.
It's quite interesting actually. I remember 25 years ago, there was a bar in London that implemented dynamic pricing for beer. All right. So the more you purchased, the more it went up. The more you didn't, the more it went down. So of course you had the consumer at the bar buying more beer, but then the next person was spending more money. This was way beyond the sort of static happy hour. Anyway, it lasted a couple of days because there were so many disgruntled customers that were spending more than the others. That this whole concept. I mean, I guess it was quite innovative at the time, but it didn't catch on. But I think dining reservations in terms of attributes like sitting by the window and things such as that. We see a lot more now in terms of guaranteed bookings that are necessary, where we've seen people fall out and not turn up for restaurants. So I definitely think there's an absolute opportunity to evaluate the success of how we could bring in, increased dining and reservation fees for appropriate service styles. It's horses for course. Again, there's a time and a place for that, right? I mean, look, in terms of dynamic pricing, we do some great things. And actually, if I think about the platforms and the booking process that we allow our customers to follow, whether that be what we call the a la carte, where they actually tailor their own workflow, they dictate their own journey, and they create that package and pop it into a basket and pay for pay for those items and that booking versus more of a I guess a structured package approach, which I think the industry will be more familiar with in terms of I book the room, I book the spa, I book the dining, but how it then in a real-time environment is interacting with all those systems. And again, picking up on the spa, dynamic pricing has been ever present for a long time. And I think it's also an opportunity to also go beyond dynamic pricing. And a specific example would be white space. So white space, for people that perhaps aren't from the spa background, are sections of your spa schedule on a weekly basis left without being used, which is essentially leaving money on the table. All right. So actually, if you can allow the systems and the technology to take control of that, blend it with dynamic capability, and not stopping there, but then blend it with the ability to ensure that allowing the system to determine your busiest times of the day and to remove those sort of low value, low margin items. All of those three components working in unison give you, your dynamic pricing capability, a much more profitable week in your schedule, and a schedule that's full, all right, based on the operational capability of your staff. And then to transcend that across the system, all right, is a fantastic opportunity to really increase those revenues, optimize where you haven't perhaps been doing that before. And again, from our perspective, we don't charge any commissions for bookings. Or if you think of those OTAs at 18, 20%, whatever they might be, coupled with spa, coupled with golf, coupled with activities, it's thousands and thousands of pounds a year that are paid out monthly by hoteliers in commission fees. And everyone that's listening will absolutely know what those invoices look like. Imagine, significantly reducing that, because we're not going to get all OTAs coming across to a direct booking straight away, but linking that into the dynamic capabilities and the elements in addition to that, as I've described, your return on investment and your, I guess, pathway to profitability and commercial success is far superior than maybe what people have in use today. So yeah, I think there's a big future for dynamic pricing and other key areas that sit around that to really, force home commercial profitability.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Right, well, I'm going to quickly wrap up those core themes, and then we'll probably have time for possibly one question. The other questions that have been submitted, so thank you very much for putting them in. If we don't have time to answer them all, we'll do it. I'll put the questions to Val and Matthew afterwards, and so we'll do a follow up to this email with some of those answers in it. But just as a kind of quick, I don't know, it's a really just quick wrap up. Effectively, the 5 core themes that we addressed today was challenging your preconceived idea of how your guest actually wants to book. The last minute element, the choice element. A lot of these people haven't necessarily, what we see, a lot of people haven't necessarily challenged it actively and really evaluated their own booking flow for a while. Treating the next one was treating personalization as a tool for staff empowerment and team empowerment of those conversations, rather than looking at it through the lens of a guest messaging process. Really interesting examples from Val there. The third was ignoring the culture shift and the sheer amount of work that needs to go behind that training and that culture shift and cross-departmental collaboration to actually maximize total revenue, or to get behind the sort of the utilization of that data, that staff empowerment thing. But looking at culture, total revenue management massively impacts culture, massively impacts that. So looking at that as well. The fourth was confusing integration with guest profile unification. Just because systems are talking to each other and technically feeding things together does not mean we have actionable, deduplicated, clean information on which to go by. So if we are doing that sort of best-in-class approach, then the unification piece is an absolutely essential part of the process, which is often overlooked. And then finally, lots of positive things to be said about dynamic revenue strategy, dynamic pricing, and Val, we've been hearing a bit about about sort of implementing that in the spa. Perhaps there's some resistance initially, generally becoming more accepted. So huge, lots of positive things to be saying. And I know, Matthew, you were kind of backing that up in terms of there's sort of excitement towards that dynamic pricing, and actually an interesting area of opportunity against the online travel agents. Their rigid structure on that and showcasing rates and things is perhaps a window or a little crack in the a crack of opportunity to be smarter with that booking process, and actually sort of have a potentially a better user experience than the sort of very structured swift OTA approach. So I'm going to sort of come with one question. I think that's all we have time for really on this. Find my questions here. Let's have a quick look at we've had lots of reinforcement on the dynamic pricing. Mark Webster, thank you for sharing that in terms of massive yes for that dynamic pricing across market segments. Let's have a quick look at the sort of the ethics behind fetching information from a guest doing all of your research behind a guest before they actually come. Pamela, you mentioned, is it considered ethical to check a guest profile on social media and doing all that research to understand if they were a keen foodie, a football fan, incorporate this into the data if it's publicly available?
There's a question. I have to. For us, we probably haven't gone quite that far yet. I think there is a point to say it's publicly available. I think we do use social media in more specific examples, particularly to highlight guests that we are already aware of, or guests that are VIPs that we are, or classed. I hate that word VIP, but it's classed as a VIP, and so that we have a little bit more awareness and knowledge about their likes and dislikes. I think for me, yes, there probably is a little bit of a question in regard to opening it up to your wider guest base, largely because of your guest perception and how they would feel about it. I think at the moment we very much focus on the information that they provide to us, even if it's in an offhand conversation, because I think ultimately, even though it's publicly available, you need to consider how that would be perceived, because as with everything, perception plays such a key role.
Yeah. My comment on that, actually, thinking off the top of my head, is always finding the middle ground. I think if they're individuals and guests that thrive on social media, all right, they're always going to be interacting with you through your social channels, all right. And if they're interacting with you, that's probably the trigger for you to react back through the channels that they are most proficient in communicating within, compared to someone that's going to telephone the next day and tell you how wonderful their stay was, or God forbid, if it still happens, I'm sure it does, someone writes a letter. They were the best, right? 20 years ago, when you'd receive a letter in the hotel explaining how fantastic the stay was. So I think it's also adapting and understanding how that customer wants to interact with you on social, and then you take that lead from there. But yeah, there's still probably in my mind a line that you need to be wary of.
Of course. Thank you so much, both of you. It's been really, really interesting, really insightful to hear from both of your businesses and both from you as individuals. So we're going to wrap things up there. Final little mention of our annual lecture with Neil Stone coming up on the 12th of February. Please do have a look at the link. I put it in the chat. And of course, the HMA Awards are now open. Matthew, Valerie, thank you so much for your time. We'll be following up with all the attendees of this webinar with the notes, the recording, and of course, some of those questions which we haven't had a chance to answer. We'll send over some thoughts on that. But thank you very much for coming today, and we'll see you on the next one.
No, thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Right.